So when I first started putting my music on Spotify, like in 2017, it was a lot easier to get on playlists. Now it's sort of become its own business in itself, and it's become pay to play.
Welcome to A Musical Mind. I'm your host, Richard Raymond II. I'm a recording engineer, music producer, and multi-instrumentalist located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In this podcast, we'll talk to a variety of musicians about the music-making process, as well as the life and mindset that have helped them find success as a musical mind. Thank you for being here. Here we go. What's up, people? Today on the show, I will be hosting the up-and-coming EDM artist based out of Austin, Texas, Minno. Rah, rah. So Minno reached out to me on Instagram a couple weeks prior to the recording of this podcast, and though we make very different music, it was cool to see some of what he does outside of making music. He's someone else who likes to eat a lot of meat. We talk a bit about that today. We talk about why we eat what we eat and what it does for us. And aside from that, he is always dropping regular content. Seems like he does a fair amount of podcasting, talks to other people, and does a great job of treating himself as a brand. And that's something I'm trying to do a bit more of. So it's been great to have some guests on who I've connected with more recently, like Drew Geiger a couple weeks back, and now Minno, who are people who are really getting themselves out there, getting those streams stacked up, and taking themselves super seriously. Because that's what this show is all about. We're taking this shit seriously. We're putting our foot on the fucking gas pedal. We're gonna make this shit happen. So here we go. Without further ado, my episode with Minno. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of A Musical Mind. I'm here today with Chris Minotti, aka Minno, the Austin, Texas based music producer and artist. Chris, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm shot. I was just explaining before we hit record, maybe like offloading a bit about the wild day that I've had. Nothing crazy happened. It was just a long one. My wife manages a yoga studio here in town, and I work there one day a week. But on Thursdays, that's her shift, and she brings our daughter with, which doesn't really work. In short, I go in on Thursdays too, but we picked up a shift in the morning before that shift, so we were there from 8 a.m. to 5:15 p.m. Then had to come home and make dinner and shit. And Dorothy, our daughter, only had two 40-minute naps. This might mean nothing to people out there who don't have children, but that wasn't enough. So she was just struggling to get through dinner. You know, it's crazy. Having kids is crazy. It's amazing. The smiles melt your heart. But god damn, man, I feel like I played football back in the day, and I swear to God, like when I go to bed these days, I'm just like, man, I feel like I had 2 days or something all day. Like I didn't even lift a weight, you know? So that's my story. But Chris, tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and how you got started making music.
Sure. My artist name is Minno. I'm originally from Connecticut. I
Ah,
lived there most of my life. I only moved to Austin recently, about 9 months ago. Um,
okay.
I briefly left Connecticut for college. I went to school in Maryland, studied mechanical engineering. I still work as a mechanical engineer today. I've been kind of doing music on the side and trying to make it my full time thing eventually. I think I first got into music well, I guess in fifth grade, I did band. I played the clarinet, and I was pretty good at it, but it was not for me. I did not like band. I quit after 2 years. My teacher was very disappointed in me.
Oh, really?
But then I joined the class called Music Tech, which was all the people that were supposedly not musically talented and quit band, and they taught music production in that, like, for 2 weeks out of the year, and I was blown away by it, immediately downloaded my own program, and I've been producing since. I did it very casually, in high school and in college. Then after college, I started taking it more seriously, and then I started my current project, Minno, and I've been making sort of laid back, melodic electronic music, and yeah, that's where I'm at today and just kinda pushing forward, trying to grow my, artist brand and, keep making better and better music.
Yeah, we connected a couple weeks back. You reached out to me. So I'm first off, I'm curious how you found me, but before you answer that, you just strike me from the little that I've done, getting to know you on the good old Instagram. You strike me as someone who's like really going for it. And as someone who had that in me for a long period of time and I've kind of like I'll say sloughed off lately, um, with the pushing my own brand type of thing. I studied advertising,
Okay.
um, so I'm, like, very conscious of all that, but I just kinda put it on the back burner because I had other things going on in my life and had steady, steady money coming in, and so it wasn't, like, a priority of mine, but now you are the second guest who I'm having on of the first 10. If people haven't caught on by now, I'm batching up to 10 episodes before I even launch just so I don't fall behind, and, you're the second who I didn't already have some sort of relationship with, and both of you are, like, really going for it, so I'm pumped to have new people in my sphere that are, inspiring me in that way. So, talk a bit about how you found me, because I imagine you found a bunch of other people because you're looking people up. What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I try to reach out to, uh, I guess, people as much as I can and just explore different avenues of, meeting people there in music and just see where it leads. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm always kind of on the grind of, reaching out to people and
Mhm.
sending people my music and things like that.
Yeah, do you remember specifically? I mean, I'm just honestly curious.
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's no worries at all. It's a numbers game. Because I wasn't sure if you'd reached out, and I think you said, like, "I'm also an electronic producer," something along those lines. I was like, "Hmm, like, did you hear my record?" 'Cause, I would call that I guess I'd call that, like, what you were saying, laid back, electronic, melodic. I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like my record," but overall, I don't know if I would call myself an electronic producer. So I figured you were pumping these things out, but that doesn't bother me, as someone who's kind of trying to do the same thing. I'm just like, yeah, for sure, I'll give you a follow. And then you had me follow your other account. I'm like, yeah, the more the merrier. Let's do this. You want to hop on the pod? Like, but what really made me interested was seeing some of your posts recently. Are you in the process of being a full carnivore right now? Is that what's happening?
Yes, I'm 12 days into full carnivore.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good right now. I'm not gonna lie, the first week was a little rough. It was a big transition. I was already eating pretty healthy. I'd say before this, I was more of like a paleo-ish type
Mhm.
diet, but very low amount of processed foods, mostly just like meat, fruit, vegetables. That was it. And I thought I'd just give carnivore diet a try because I was hearing a lot of stuff about it. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying it out. I did a bulk order from a local ranch here in
Nice.
Austin, and I got my high quality meat, and I'm enjoying it so far. I thought it would be a lot harder than it is because in my head I was like, "Oh, eating the same thing every day is going to be so boring," but it's also steak, so that's kind of awesome.
Totally. So where did you kinda hear about this? For people who don't know, I think I talked about it in my episode with my friend Duke, but are you familiar with Paul Saladino by chance?
Yes, I am. I've been following him recently.
I, I work for him. I work on
Oh,
his
really?
podcast. Yeah,
Oh,
I
wow.
just basically, I just mix and master his podcast. My wife does all the editing, and we've been doing that
That's
for
awesome.
Yeah, probably, coming up on 2 years. We just cold emailed him because we were fans and, his podcast sounded like trash back in the day,
Eh.
and my wife's just kind of like, "This is ridiculous," like, I'm emailing him. It almost sends this, like, strong worded, like, "Paul, come on," like, "This is ruining the listening experience," type of thing, like, "Hire my husband and I" well, we weren't married at the time, but whatever, "Let us make your" "get your audio up to par." And, we didn't think we'd hear back, and then he was like, "Hey, I've actually been looking to hire people in this department," and then it was, like, 2 days later, we, like, had his Instagram password, which we don't anymore. We don't work like he has lots of people who work for him. He's grown measurably since then, but, I figured that you might be aware of who he is. So I'm very familiar with all this stuff because I hear about it all the time, so that's what
Did
piqued
you
my
did you say
interest.
you do, an animal-based diet?
Yeah, like, I don't follow it religiously,
Right.
but, actually, that's a weird way to put it because I was thinking about this before we hopped on because food and, food is something that for as long as humans have been around, it's been something that I feel like people get in arguments about, "Can't eat this, can't eat that," "Do this, don't do that." It's weird, it is kind of like a lot of times it is tied to religion, so I say I don't do it religiously. By that, I mean I don't follow it 100% of the time, but I will go out there and say that I do kind of wear it as a badge like my religion, like
Yeah.
I am animal based, it means a lot to me and it's something I think about every single day and pretty much every single meal, whether I'm following it, quote unquote, or not. Um, but yeah, anyway, I saw you were doing the steak thing, so I thought that was pretty cool, and I want to hear more about it. And I do also want to use this platform to kind of maybe cue in the musicians on some of these other things that are going on because I know we're typically not the healthiest bunch of people, and
Yeah.
I think this could be a unexpected place for people to learn about shit that maybe they wouldn't seek out if, you know, we're under the guise of music here, you know what I mean? But so
Yeah.
let's talk about this because I think being in good health contributes to making good music, and I've seen that happen in my own world. So, um, I know you had an autoimmune condition that you've had some success flipping with your diet. So talk a bit about that if you might.
Yeah, so in 2020, I started having sort of random neurological symptoms, numbness on the left side of my body, which was pretty scary at the time. I didn't really know what was going on. So I started going down the traditional route of, seeing my regular doctor, then a neurologist, and I quickly realized that they didn't have any answers to it.
Mhm.
And eventually they were testing me for MS. I never actually got a diagnosis on
Right.
anything. I think I nipped it in the bud, whatever it was, but it I eventually just was I think I'd listened to some podcast and heard something about like the brain gut connection, and I was like, okay, I'm experiencing neurological symptoms. Maybe there's something diet related that could help. So I tried an
Mhm.
autoimmune paleo diet. I felt like maybe like 30 to 50% better, and I was like, oh wow, this is crazy. So I eventually ended up seeing a naturopath, um, and then eventually a functional medicine doctor, and they were able to diagnose that the problem was in my gut, and it was after a course of antibiotics that I did that all of this was triggered.
Uh-huh.
And I sort of went down that rabbit hole, completely changed my diet. I eliminated gluten and dairy. I still don't have gluten and dairy, uh, like even before I started carnivore. And yeah, it just slowly reversed over like a 2-year period. And now I'm totally healthy, and in hindsight, it was actually, like, even though it was, like, a terrible time for me with all that the health issues going on, it was ultimately a positive thing in my life because it sort of brought me down this path of long-term health, and now I understand what causes disease and how to prevent it, and it's not only something that I can use for myself, I can, pass it on to my future family and all that, so, I mean, I think ultimately it's yeah, I guess experiencing poor health that uh, forced me to learn what it requires to have good health.
Yeah, man, that's awesome to hear, and congrats to you. Happy you're feeling better, and I'm happy you're being vocal about it because I think it's important to share what we know, and I think a lot of what I grew up, considering healthy based off what I was learning in school or whatever it may be is not how I look at things now, and, the only way other people are gonna find that out is if people like you and I are shouting it from the mountaintop, so, um, yeah, what were you eating prior to these things popping up? I know you said the antibiotics kind of, uh, you know, brought on the cascade or whatever, but I'm just curious what you were doing
Yeah.
before that.
Um, so I had changed my diet a little prior to it because I had some gut issues like 2 years prior that so I had some experience with, changing up my diet and trying to eat healthy, but before that, like in high school and college, I just ate whatever. Like, there was a
Mhm,
point in my life where I was drinking, like, 3 sodas a day. It was not a good thing, and I kinda in hindsight, looking back, I realized that I was just poisoning myself with all the junk food I would eat. I would just eat bags of potato chips like it was nothing, and, I'm glad I had moved away from that because it really does have a profound impact on aspects of your life that you don't even realize when you start eating healthy. You have more energy. In the past, I'd experienced depression. Since changing my diet, I have not been depressed.
mhm.
It's it affects your life in ways that you don't even know it can.
Totally. Yeah, I think I would agree with the depression thing. That is one thing since, being out here. I've lived in Colorado for about 2 years now, and that was kind of like my now wife and I moved out here together, and when we moved out, like, we we set up our butcher box thing where we get, like, a bunch of meat every month, and we were kind of like, "Alright, when we move out there, we're gonna start, like, moving heavier in this direction because it was just something that felt, um when you hear about it from the people who are most educated on all of this, I'm not, I may work on the podcast, but I'm not the one who should be explaining this. I can vouch for it, but I'm not qualified to explain it. I can in layman's terms. But anyway, started doing that, started eating liver. We eat heart as well. And I have not felt depressed for years. I was sad all the time, like that was just kind of like part of who I was. It was something I always wanted to like overcome. Um, I kind of take issue with the whole sad boy archetype that I feel like has become this like desirable state, which I think is ridiculous. And
Yeah, I
frankly,
agree totally.
I think it's a byproduct of like this widespread malnutrition. Um, but yeah, I've not felt that. I will say that like I've experienced anger like I haven't before. I don't mean that I'm like an angry human or anything like that, but I've experienced a lot of that. I would say like being in a long-term relationship, which is something that like when things got hard before, I always got out of there. So that was like something that would stir up a lot of this for me. But I don't think that anger is bad. I don't think any emotion, given that it's like fleeting and not something that's persistent, is a bad thing. But I had persistent sadness from like 16 to like 24 or 25, and I just
Mhm.
don't feel that anymore. And yeah, I absolutely think that what I'm eating and the way that I'm living, I don't smoke anymore. There's a whole handful of things that have contributed to that, but it's concerning to me that it's this like almost like desirable thing it seems like, and I just want people to run like hell from that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is We glorify a victim mentality, and people almost want to be a victim, and it's not really a good story to tell depressed people that it's okay to be depressed and you should just sort of accept it, because there's a lot you can do individually to make it better. It should be kind of a motivational thing, being like, okay, you're depressed. Let's brainstorm. Maybe there's some things you can change in your life that are causing you to be depressed, where if you changed it, you wouldn't be. Whether
Mhm.
it's, I don't, maybe it could just be a toxic relationship someone needs to get out of. It could be food. It could be a lot of things. And I think if you treat it as a problem that needs to be fixed, it's a much healthier approach than sort of just sulking in it and being like, it's okay.
Yeah, and, including it in your your Instagram handle or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it just irks me, and I feel for the people, like I said, I've been there, but
Yeah.
don't claim it as yours, because if you do that, then, like, good luck. You're literally wearing it now,
Yeah.
I viewed it more so like you, like, "What can I do to make this different?" I think that's probably what, um when I first kinda heard about the whole animal-based thing, that was like I was always searching for things to feel better, and I just happened to stumble upon that, and, just made sense. I wasn't even I was working on some music stuff and had to do a lot of editing. I was working on my first sample pack, so I was just listening to podcasts, and I saw a carnivore diet and was kind of like, "What the hell?" Like, I was at that point in time, I probably would have considered being a vegetarian, and so I was kind of like, "That seems insane." Like, "Sure, yeah, I'm gonna put that on." And it was kind of a grabby title because at this point, Paul's not a carnivore. Um, but over time, it just made sense because I have acid reflux, which I found out about in my early 20s. Um, yeah, I'll just share this all here. Why not? So I was super sad, and for me, it would like manifest as this like lump in my throat. Like it felt like I got called into the principal's office. But I knew I wasn't in trouble, but like that, like, "Oh, shit," like, I did something wrong type of, sensation, not feeling. I just felt sad. I didn't feel like I had done something wrong, but that's the best way I can describe it. Like, when I was little, it would be that same, like, lump in the throat. So, long story short, I wound up going to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and, he's, like, looking at my throat, and he's like, "Oh, like, I'm seeing signs of acid reflux. That must be what this is." And I'm kind of like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." Like, cool, like, that's all great, but, like, I'm telling you that I feel sad, and, like, I think, to me, this is, like, this thing I'm trying to get rid of. Like, I will know that I feel better when I don't feel this lump in my throat, you know what I mean? It was, like, this thing I was kinda fixated on. So, that was very unsatisfactory visit to me. My mom kinda encouraged me to go because, I had lots of ear infections as a kid, so this ear, nose, and throat doctor is a doctor I had been seeing for my ears every couple of years since I was little. She's like, "Oh, like, he can look at your throat. He's a throat doctor too. Go check it out." Even though I told her, like, "Hey, mom, I feel really shitty," but that's just she's not like a doesn't maybe more so now, but definitely didn't have a holistic approach. Like, "Oh, like," it was I was kinda gaslit by her. Anyway, making this a little too long. So, they gave me a list of foods, that I should avoid. And I was kind of like, "Okay, cool." Like, I don't feel like I have maybe I do have early signs of reflux. That's all great, but, like, I'm not having reflux symptoms based off of what you're telling me here. So I was like, "Okay, cool." Took some of it into consideration, but for the most part, just kinda kept eating what I was eating. Um, but then when I was hearing this first podcast with Paul, and he's kinda talking about all of the most, like, the most toxic plant foods, I'm just like, "Oh, that's, like, literally everything on that list I was told to avoid for acid reflux, like, maybe there's something here," and it was just kinda
Mm.
this, like, slow thing, and then I, like, started seeking out more information, and the more I, like, look into it, I'm just like, "This just makes sense." Like, I've never heard something about food that is so intuitive to me, but it's not common knowledge by any stretch. And I think it hopefully we're moving in that direction. But yeah, that was my whole piece with how with how I kind of stumbled into all of that. And uh, it seems like people who have some sort of issue wind up in this area and find relief. So that's why we're talking about it here on a music podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no, like I don't like to say that there's, like, one diet that will fit everybody and be the perfect diet. I kinda think that that's an individual thing that people need to experiment with and figure out. But I do think a part of why we see people have so much drastic health improvements when they go on these diets, whether it's paleo, carnivore, I mean, even vegan sometimes, even though
Totally.
I'm not a fan of it, is because they're cutting out processed foods.
Exactly.
And there are so many toxic ingredients in those types of foods that are not meant to be digested, and you're kind of just slowly poisoning yourself, and it's like death by a thousand cuts, and people don't realize it because, and especially when you're used to eating it, how you feel on the while eating those foods just becomes a normal, and you don't know how you're actually supposed to feel on a healthy diet until you try it and you just cut out all those processed foods. So I
Totally.
think, yeah, it can
Yeah, I
have
mean, go ahead, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying some of these toxic foods we're referring to, like other countries have gotten their wits about them and have made them illegal to put in
Yeah.
food. Not over here, you
Yep.
know. Anyway, but all of that said, I think it's about time we start talking about music here. So, scoped you out a little bit, and I noticed you are someone who has a lot of streams, and I've seen some of your content where you've been talking about Spotify, and I know you have lots of feelings about it. So, I kind of just want you can give us the 101 on getting plays and getting paid. That would be amazing.
Okay. In terms of getting paid, I'm not the best person to ask that. It's not music is not my full-time job yet,
Sure. Hmm.
but I do make some streaming income, and I more or less invest all of that back in my music. Um, so what I've done to get to where I'm at now and get I've mostly focused on Spotify. I think that's the easiest platform to grow right now.
Hmm.
I think my initial start on Spotify was sending my song to playlists. So when I first started putting my music on Spotify, like in 2017, it was a lot easier to get on playlists than it is now. I think the environment was way different than it is now, and now it's sort of become its own business in itself. It's become pay to play.
Hmm.
And a lot of playlists, if you hit them up, will be like, "Yeah, you can, get on our playlist for $40," or
Hmm.
something like that. So it's not very favorable to people, you know, who maybe don't have a lot of money or a huge marketing budget. And a lot of these playlists, you have to be careful because there are some that are scammy, and they'll run bots, and it's actually just fake plays. I've fallen for that in the past, and
Hmm.
you can immediately tell because the plays don't really translate to anything, and they're all from weird countries. And yeah, so now what I've been doing is I've been running Spotify. Uh, I've been driving traffic to Spotify through ads, and I run ads on Facebook, and pretty much, I guess for those listening, there's this guy on YouTube, Andrew Southworth. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
No, we'll put them in the show notes though.
yeah, he has a YouTube channel where he goes over a lot of music marketing stuff and how to run ads on Facebook and drive traffic that way. And I basically learned everything that I've done through him, and I realized that ads alone are in a way just wasting money. Like if you like they're not in any way profitable, but if you can trigger the Spotify algorithm, you can make your money back. which is
Mhm.
awesome. Like in music, if you can run a marketing campaign where you're breaking even, I think that's great, especially when
Totally.
you're starting out and you don't have a big
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah.
So what I realized with the Spotify algorithm is Spotify is overloaded with music and they can't put all the songs on their algorithms just because there's too much music out there. Even if it's good, even if it's getting like a high percentage of saves, they need some threshold to eliminate the bulk of music so they know so they have a reasonable amount of songs to work with.
Mhm.
So what that is they have a minimum threshold of plays that you need to get on Discover Weekly, which is a Spotify playlist.
Mhm.
And I found it's like in the like 8,000 plays a month range. So if you
Plays, not listeners, so you're talking, like, for an individual track?
streams, yeah.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
per
so I mean, yeah, so roughly like let's say 8,000 plays or 3 or 4,000 listeners.
Mhm.
And if you get to that, then and your song on top of that is getting a high percentage of saves and people are listening to it for a long time and are sharing it, then Spotify will recognize this song is good and they'll put it on their algorithmic playlist, like Discover Weekly, Radio is another one. Uh, and yeah, that's where I get the bulk of my plays from now. And it kind of is just like autopilot and you consistently get streams from Spotify and I don't need to put any more money in it. And because of that, it makes it affordable. I mean, there is an initial investment up front, but you'll get your money back eventually if the song is good and you trigger the algorithm. And in
Yeah.
the nature of marketing, most songs you're not gonna make money on. But I mean, that's not really the goal anyway. It's just to get it out to people. And usually it's, your top 1 or 2 songs that make the majority or get the majority of the streams.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, even
yeah.
if they're not necessarily they may not be your top 2 songs, but yeah, it's just not really how it goes. Well, thanks for laying all that out there. This is something I'm trying to learn a lot more about because though I've been releasing music since, like, 2016, I think, I'm realizing, like, how fucking late to the game I am on so much of this, and I blame it on my own ego, and then not ego about my own music, but my ego about, like, the way that I have treated Spotify, which I've had since I was in high school, so probably, 2013, 2014, um, earlier than that. That's besides the point. I know so much music that I would just search what I want, and I would, like, almost like the plague, avoid whatever they were recommending to me because 'cause I'm like, "I'm my own fucking DJ." Like, I'm here because this is a great service, and it has, like, anything that I could possibly want, but I don't want you telling me what to listen to. Like, that was, like, my attitude. And so I've to this day, like, I don't really, like, use Spotify for all that it is, with, like, having my Discover Weekly or whatever, daily mix and all that good stuff. Like, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've actually played those things, and I like them. Don't get me wrong, like, they got me figured out, but I'm like, it
Yeah.
was all ego, like, I just didn't wanna do it. And so now as I'm hearing people talking about, like, getting on playlists and things, I'm just like, Jesus, like, I was just not thinking about any of this, like, I'd kinda just thought, I don't know, like, you had to have a label behind you or something else, like, I just, you know, to the point that I kind of, like, gave up on trying to get streams or earn any sort of money from streams, and I've fallen into, like, working with other, musicians as a producer and, mixing people's music, mastering people's music. That wound me up into the podcast world because it's kinda the same toolbox there, and I was able to find steady income there for a while, and so it just, like, wasn't motivated to try and do these sorts of things, but as I'm before we hopped on, I was explaining I need to start generating some more income. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I've been making music this whole time. Like I'm hearing people who, you know, like they're just another person like me, like who've really managed to rack up their plays. And as you said, it's not something you can live off of, but I have other streams of income too. I want more streams. So,
Right.
no pun intended. And so, let's like, let's make this happen. So I'm just trying to pick people's brains and get to know more about it. And that's the conclusion I've come to. I blame my own ego for being so late to the game. Um, but yeah, so thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. I'll definitely be checking out that YouTube channel. Can you tell us the his name one more time?
Yeah, it's Andrew Southworth.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll have that in the show notes so everyone else can go learn some good stuff there as well. What's up, guys? Taking a quick pause here to talk about my sample pack, Laid Back and Groovy Guitars. I did this sample pack with 5 Pin Media, the British sample pack label. And in this sample pack, you will find 376 live guitar loops, 144 guitar one shots, and 142 lap steel one shots, all drawing on an influence from psych, jazz, funk, and soul, inspired by artists such as Khruangbin, Goat, Fela Kuti, and Herbie Hancock. All these loops are both DI and the amp signal with printed effects and are distributed over the BPMs 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, and 120, all evenly distributed over 4 different keys, giving you a wide variety of moods and feel to play with. Guys, there is a ton in this sample pack. Check it out. Get all the guitar you need for your beats. If you're a drummer, you want to play along to some guitar loops, whatever you need, this thing has it. I spent a shitload of time on this. Click the link in the show notes. Once again, Laid Back and Groovy Guitars by 5 Pin Media, available on loopmasters.com. Go and get it. So I know you have a new record coming out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So I'm working on my album. It's my first full length record. I released previously an EP in 2020, and before that, it's only been singles. So this is by far my biggest project.
Hmm.
It's a lot of work. I've been working on it all year. It's almost done. It's in the final mixing and mastering phases. So I'm kind of just waiting and trying to get that finished, and then after that, I'll announce a release date, and it'll be out there. I'm excited. I think it's the best music I've made
That's
thus
great.
far, and I'm proud of it, and I'm excited to share it with people.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to hear it, and I'm also just curious about your music making process. Um, what does that look like? Are you someone who's kind of messing around with loops? Are you performing things? Is it some hybrid of the two? Are you singing? Fill us in because there's a lot of different ways to go about it these days.
Right. I use a program called Mixcraft.
Hmm. I'm not
I
familiar.
Yeah, it's an obscure one. It's not very popular, but I love the workflow, and I've
Is this
never.
like a audio workstation you're referring
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
DAW.
Okay, gotcha.
And, yeah, so I use that, and I use a lot of virtual instruments. Occasionally, I'll use loops, mostly just drum loops, and
Mhm,
it's I'll never use, like, a complete drum loop. It'll be like a hat loop or, like, of a specific thing,
mhm.
and, yeah, I kinda just piece together whatever, comes to my brain, and my creative process is I try to be very free flowing and not analyze things too uh, intensely, and I could sort of just take what's in my mind and let it flow out into the computer. And I try not. The more I find I create barriers of trying to make a specific genre or trying to, I like this song. Let me make something like this. I think I find the worse my song comes out. And when I go in with no rules and just being, I'm just gonna make whatever sounds good and go with that, that tends to be the best result. So that's kind of my creative process.
That's interesting to hear because I think I've actually had a lot of success with, deliberately trying to rip something off,
Oh,
because
really?
for me, it never comes out that way, but it really gives me a
Yeah.
sense of direction. Like, I've done that numerous times. So it's interesting to hear that, like, that doesn't work for you because that's something like
Well, I
yeah,
shouldn't say it doesn't work. Like I've definitely done that in the past where I'm trying to copy a song and it works out, but I guess I've sort of gotten to I think that is very good for learning a new style of production
totally.
and like honing your skills. Like that's like the way you should do it in the beginning. And then I guess now as I've sort of like developed my own sound more than in the past, I guess it's more recently that I've found better success being sort of just open and free flowing.
Mm. So, on a given song, do you kind of have a typical Mm, like order of events, I'll say? Like, are you starting with percussion? Are you starting with some chords that you're writing? Because those are 2 really different things, I feel like, starting with a groove versus starting with some form of harmony in the form of chords or even a vocal melody, you know?
Yeah. When I was making remixes, it was always start out with the vocal.
Mhm.
Now I haven't really been doing remixes, so it's always I start out with either chords or a bass line,
Mm,
and I build off of that. Drums, I usually add in later. A lot of times I'll build out like a whole soundscape of instruments, and then I'll add in drums later. I think that's probably
really?
just because
Yeah.
in nature, I'm better at, uh, sort of writing melodies than I am percussion.
Mhm.
Percussion for me was not natural. I had to be very methodical about it and sort of like learn rhythms that work, um, versus melodies are very natural, and I just e even though I don't know music theory, like, I can't read music or play any instruments, but I understand it intuitively, so
So, when you're like, are you using a MIDI keyboard when you're coming up with chords and things? Or you
sometimes.
how else would you be going about it?
Sometimes I'll just imagine a chord progression in my head, and I'll write out the notes individually. I'll just kind of just trial and error until the chord matches what's in my head, and then I'll be like, "Okay, this works." So then I build the progression out, and I'm like, "Oh, yep, that's it."
As someone who knows a little bit about music theory, I would be fascinated to look at some of your progressions and, like,
Yeah.
see if, see how, simple or complex they are because I'm guessing, I'm gonna guess that, like, they're probably not as straightforward as I would not me, well, I'm saying I don't think that, but as people might think, I think, like, you're describing your process as you're really just kinda channeling and letting things come through, and I think, like, what comes through, um, in those true forms like that tends to be, like, almost superhuman, whereas when you're, like, really trying to like, I almost wrote more simple stuff, from a chord standpoint, like, when I or progression, I should say, um, chord progression standpoint when I became more familiar with music theory because I was trying to adhere to it. Whereas like before I had any clue, I made a lot more interesting progressions. Now I feel like I have a bit of balance there. But so I would love to like check out your MIDI roll and see what you wound up putting in there. But that's also fascinating. Like um I feel like I'm kind of a drummer at heart, though maybe guitar is my best instrument, I don't know, but, like, I can totally build a song around a groove, but when I was first writing songs, it was definitely like, either guitar or piano, writing chords, writing, like, what I call Beatles songs, and by that, I just mean, like, you got your verse, you got your chorus, probably got a bridge in there,
Mhm.
classic songwriting, um, but within the past couple of years, have become very groove oriented. And what's cool about being groove oriented is you don't need as good of a song. That's what I'll say. Like if you groove hard, you can play the same thing over and over. If everything's moving, you got your shakers going, maybe some aux percussion, whatever. Like it can really, it's almost like making dance music, in like traditional dance music. Whereas, I find that like those songs that are written from the melody, especially if it starts with the vocal melody. Like, I've written some songs where I'm, like, singing something in the shower, and I'm just like, "Shit," like, I'm gonna build everything around that, and those tend to be really strong. Those types of songs, melody or harmony coming first, can be played in any groove and hold up. And so that's kind of the big distinction for me, and it's a really different approach. I've had fun doing both, but I think what you're describing, I have a feeling those things could be contorted into any genre and hold form, because it's coming from a writing standpoint, not a groove standpoint. If that makes any sense, that's what I've come to notice over the years.
Yeah, I like to judge my music on the basis if I were to break everything down to just a piano and play that melody, would it sound good? And that's kind of how I approach my songwriting and my uh, production. I like the musical elements at the core to be solid, and also I love acoustic covers. I love piano covers of songs. Like I listen to that type of music like pretty regularly. So I think that's just kind of what I tend to uh, favor.
Mhm. I'm curious, your background as an engineer, do you find that to be helpful or useful, as a music artist? Because I know probably think of them as being pretty d different fields, but I'm thinking you've found a way to tie them together.
Yeah, it's I think it definitely helps on the production end of things in terms of
Totally.
because production can be very technical, and I think just having a technical mind is very beneficial and allows you to learn it quicker. In terms of writing music, not really. I think that's sort of like just a creative side that I kinda think is, like, separate from what I've learned in engineering, but
Mhm.
there's definitely, some elements where it can carry over and help.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. Um, engineering Well, I was referring to audio engineering, and that's kind of the whole point. It is a form of engineering. And yeah, like what made me kind of take it more seriously was realizing that a lot of my friends like literally could not stand being in an audio workstation. Like there was one time years ago, like I had some friends and they knew I mixed my own stuff and they had some drums. They wanted them to sound better. They're like, "Can you make them sound better?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll try." And they were over and kind of over my shoulder as I was doing this, and they're just like, "Do you like doing this?" And I was like, "I mean, I think I like writing and playing more, but like it's got to be done, Like if I have an idea of how to make it better, like, it has to happen for me, And I just remember one of them in particular just being like, "Dude, like, I can't do more than 5 minutes, like, and then I'm out." And that was kind of like a moment for me. It didn't all hit, like, it wasn't like this big epiphany, but over time, I was like, maybe, like, I should continue growing these skills here because even some of my friends might need me, and, that wound up being the case. So that is kind of like a different thing that, those are, I'll call them true musicians. They can all play circles around me with their instruments. Um, but, I've been able to, I guess, just have the brain for it. I don't know. That feels too like arrogant. I think it's mostly just like like my archetype, like I can stand doing that.
Mhm.
Not that like I'm smarter in that way or something. I think it's just like tolerance.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of music producers tend to be kinda techie and,
Mhm.
like, already into a lot of technical stuff like that, so it seems like an easy transition for most people that produce, but if you're a music if you're like a musician and you're a guitarist or something and you're not very technical, I can totally see how that would be overwhelming.
Yeah,
Uh,
I feel somewhere in the middle. I've never been like a big math and science guy, but enough to where like I don't know. I mostly am like a by feel guy, more than
yeah,
a numbers guy, but I have a close friend who I had on the episode who's very much like he wanted to be a pilot, so he was, like loves that type of stuff. And I learned like what I needed to learn from him to like clean up. I'm like trying to make everything sound cool and weird and like vibey, like very much like, more of the thinking abstractly when I'm operating versus like thinking in terms of, how waveforms are interacting or, like visualizing that sort of thing. Which I do from time to time, but he kind of taught me the things that like you need to know. Like, hey, like don't clip on your master bus or like
yeah.
you want your mix to sit at around minus 6 dB. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do anything with it afterwards. Like those types of things, those like that I needed to know how to do um, in order to get to a point where I was like comfortable with people hiring me. I learned all those like need to knows from him and then still able to bring in like all that flavor. I'll say I feel like that's my strength is kind of bringing in the vibe, but very different things. Um, yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of hear your take on that. So you see them as separate as well, the engineering and kind of the creativity type of side.
Yeah, definitely. And even when I produce music, I try to separate the technical stuff with the creative stuff as I'm making it. I like to get all the creative stuff out in the beginning when it's fresh in my mind and get as much of it into the audio workstation as possible and as quickly as possible. And then I kind of worry about the mixing and the technical stuff at the end of the song, almost after I have like the whole structure laid out of the song and the instrumentation.
Interesting. Like even if you, in the same day, like are you kind of going from one thing to the next, or is there almost like even like a whole pause in there? Where I'm going with this is like I think it's got to be like literal different parts of your brain, and like
Mhm.
you can't have them both firing at the same time. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, sometimes it's a separate day. I'll do the mixing and technical stuff. I I'll mix a little as I'm going, like, I'll do basic, like, volume adjustment and, like, side chain like, anything that's, like, stylistic, I'll do, um, but I try not to worry about it too much until the end. It's, yeah, it just it's easy to get caught up in one, like, little technical thing, like, "Oh, I gotta make this snare sound perfect," and then you realize, like, "Oh, shoot, what was that idea I had before?" Then you forgot.
Yeah.
So I save all that for the end.
Yeah, totally. I need to look at this board in front of me. I don't have it memorized, but I'll step away in a second so I can read it and then tell everyone. My favorite YouTube channel for music is it's called Kush After Hours and is hosted by Gregory Scott. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'll have to check
Okay.
that out.
Yeah, so he's like he brings, I would say, philosophy to mixing. So he's like a very well-read dude, seems like a somewhat like spiritual dude, but he's also a total nerd and understands all the tech. Like owns a plug-in company, but I believe it all was originally just analog gear, and they still sell gear. but I think they've just had a bigger market doing plugins. But all of his advice is very, it's not technical. It's very, like, kind of abstract, and that really resonates with me, even though he's totally someone who could talk X's and O's all day. But I'm
Mhm.
gonna just peek over here for 1 second because he breaks down the song making process, the whole process into, like, 6 parts, I think, and I gotta cite them off here. So song, arrangement, performance, recording, mix, and then production. And so this is kind of how he breaks it down. And he's like, nowadays, with modern audio workstations, it's so easy to go out of order, and how that can be like the most stifling thing to do when you're you're working on the production when you don't even have the song yet, and
Yeah.
I've fallen prey to that so many times. And as I was talking, going back to the early days, like before I knew all the bells and whistles of the production side, like I had the full ass song before I even recorded a note, whereas now like it's all blends together, and it can be tricky. Like I've gotten to a finished song by constantly, shifting around out of order, but it is a much more smooth process if you kind of follow that arc, and maybe you have 4 steps instead of the 6 that he laid out there or whatever, but it definitely there's something to it.
Yeah, because performance and recording don't really apply to the type of music I make because I don't play any instruments and I don't sing. Although I did sing on one song, but that doesn't really count. It was, like, heavily, distorted and not really sounding like my actual voice, but
Sure. Yeah, but I think that's kind of the whole point, like, there's merit in the same way that, like, maybe let's put a bow on all this here. So in the same way maybe that, a given diet, having it be something that historically we've done, we're familiar with this, our body's familiar with this. This isn't new processed bleach oils and shit that, we can buy on shelves nowadays. Like this is something we're familiar with, something we've evolved with, and like there's some harmony there. There's continuity there, familiarity there. Um, Bring that over to making a song, and like originally in the early days, first days of recording, like you did not go in to a studio until you knew what your song was, and you kind of had, even in that day, like you would have had things like charted out. So you kind of have everything laid out, and there's not going to be you're going to go until you finish. Like I don't think there was this type of like thing where, people have hard drives full of shit that goes unfinished, because we're working in a completely like unorganic workflow, and that's why you keep hitting all these snags in the same way, where if you're eating this shit that your body's not designed to have, but sorry, not designed to process, you're going to create complications.
hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That maybe makes me wanna almost rethink my workflow and see if it could be optimized. 'Cause I
Totally,
do
man.
get complacent with that, and, I do something and it works, but there could be something better. So,
Yeah, I think it's just a smoother way to do things. So
yeah.
I'll have to put that in the show notes too, because I've already forgot all 6 of the things. But I'll link that video in the show notes. That's what I'll do. That Kush After Hours video. And yeah, do check out his stuff. He's kind of he took a break. Something happened in his life, and I need to like do more research. Something big and mysterious. He keeps everything mysterious over there happened. So he hasn't been putting out a lot of stuff recently, and I've kind of made my way through all the other stuff. But if you go back, if you haven't seen any of it, there's plenty there for you. And I take something away from every video. Um, I would say that channel, and then there's a magazine called Tape Op, and I've been getting that. I think it's bi-monthly since I was, like, 18 or 19, and it's mostly just, like, interviews of artists and producers and very, like it's kind of like a magazine, I would say, for other artists and producers more so than, like, for fans, because it's very, like they talk about gear a lot and,
Mhm.
music making process and all that good stuff. It's just pretty much interviews and ads, so you learn about the shit that you don't need, like, I have Little Plate, the Sound Toys plugin. Now there's think it's big plates, and,
Eh.
if you already have Little Plate, you can upgrade for just, like, $40, and I think 30, 40, or 50, I forget, somewhere in that range, and, I use Little Plate all the time, so I'm like, "No, I gotta upgrade," but if I wasn't reading freaking tape-op, I wouldn't even know it's out there.
Yeah, I think I have a Sound Toys bundle. I don't know if Little Plate's in there because I don't use it. I use, like, an obscure reverb that came with my, DAW. It's called, like, Fusion Field,
Mm,
but I don't it's, like, very kinda high and crispy, and I like it, and you can kinda like, if you listen to the like, my music, you can kinda hear, like, that type of reverb, but it and now I also got, yeah, I'm blanking on the name, but I've got a new reverb plugin that I've been trying out too. Oh,
cool.
it's Fab Filter.
Okay, I'm familiar with
Yeah.
that one. I've not used it, but I've heard of it. Um, do you have, like, kind of so do you have a couple that you would say, like, find their way into every mix? If you don't mind sharing those, and I'll share mine for fun, and, then we'll close out here.
Sure. As far as plugins, as I mentioned, Fusion Field tends to find its way in. I've been using Fab Filter for compression, EQ, sidechain, OTT. I use a lot.
I don't even know what that is.
It stands for over the top.
Oh, okay.
It's like a aggressive compression program, and it's very simplistic. You kinda just turn a knob or whatever, and
Nice.
I mean, there's a few knobs, but it if you use it as is, it sounds ridiculous, like nobody would ever use it, but if you turn like, the wetness down, it sounds pretty cool.
Ah,
So, like, I'll always I'll bring the wetness down to, like, 20 or 30%, and I find for electronic music that plugin is very good. Um, it's popular too. Um, what else? Um, for synthesizers, I use, Serum a lot. I use Omnisphere a lot for, like, a sound library. Um, yeah, I mean, those are the big ones.
yeah, it's cool, like, there's so many out there nowadays. It's like creating your own tool belt, and I'm kind of at a
Yeah.
point now where, like, if someone were to take away some of those staples of mine, like, I would have to reestablish my sonic identity, and for me, it's been, honestly so Kush, they are a plug-in company, and they make, a lot of good stuff, but I have only bought yeah, I just have all 4 of them. They're preamps, and what I like about them is they just add color, and each one of them, to me, I've noticed, like, um I don't know why I said "to me" because it probably is objective, like, they're probably each one is boosting they kinda have their own, Wow, I'm really talking around in circles here. I'm gonna pause. I will edit here. Each one of them kind of lends itself to a certain part of the frequency spectrum. For example, there's this one, it's like 458A, I think. And that one holds bottom end in a way that the other three like definitely don't. Um, and then there's the Model N, and that one that's like modeling a Neve preamp, and that I'm almost always using on drums, um, is very mid-rangey and adds warmth. Um, and so and then there's the A, which is kind of like an API preamp, and I like that on guitars because it's got better top end. But those are things I'll put on pretty much every single track is gonna get one of those 4 preamps based off wherever I'm thinking I want it to sit in the mix or what I'm trying to highlight. I know which ones are the best at highlighting which thing. And now I'm adding in some color, and then they're all just one knob, um, which is like a distortion or
Mhm.
drive, I think they call it. And so if I'll drive things like that, or sometimes I'll even roll that all the way back to 0, but it's still probably doing some subtle, subtle compression, but also like brightening or dulling in whatever frequencies that I kind of am going for. So that's the big thing. And then the other thing, I'll put the Neve on the master bus, and then a Kramer master tape. Uh, I forget who makes that. I think it's Waves, but I use a preset. It's soft, clean compression. Those two things, like I open up a project and like almost before I record anything, I'll put those two on the master bus, and that just like uh, once I started doing that, and it not that I'd learned a lot of other shit too, so it wasn't just those 2 plugins that made my stuff sounding good. Made my stuff to start made my stuff start sounding good, but, once I kinda did that, I was like, "Now this actually sounds um, like records that I listened to." Felt like I
Mhm.
had that type of glue and, warmth that I was after.
Yeah, what does Neve do? I'm not familiar with that one.
Neve, so they're like a they made boards back in the day. So Rupert Neve is the guy, and yeah, they made like preamps and compressors and
Okay.
probably a lot more than that. Not an expert, but it's kind of all the rage. Like I know to this day, like anything Neve that was made by him um, is super sought after. So this is just it's modeling a Neve preamp. Um, and yeah, there's very warm. That would be the way I would more than clear, like not clear or bright or hi-fi. I would say warm. That's my yeah.
One, like, random thing with, like, this just came to my head from for mixing is, like, so much of, like, learning how to mix in my experience has been just listening to music and,
Mm,
like, almost, like, dissecting it in your head. I found periods where I'm not even, like, producing music. I'll take a break, but I'm listening to a lot of music that I'll come back and I'm better at mixing just because I've been, like, I don't know, when you're a producer, you listen to music differently. Like, that's something that they don't tell you when you start is, like, you'll never hear music exactly as you did before you started producing because 'cause you're thinking of all the elements now, and it's, like, a whole process, and you're thinking about mixing and, like, "Oh, that sounds cool," or balanced or whatever, and but, yeah, it's, so much of mixing is your ear,
mhm.
and I've also found there's this I think it was Steve Duda that said that he could make a mix, better than most of his students by just, adjusting the volume knob
Really?
on, uh, on each instrument, and he was saying that, like, volume adjustment is 95% of a good mix, which is an interesting take, because obviously a good mix is a lot more than that, but it's the most important thing is having everything balanced first. So that's when I mix, that's what I spend most of my time on, just adjusting volume and tweaking little things, and then I do all the fancy stuff at the end.
Interesting. And by fancy stuff, you mean like any automation or stuff like that, or you talk about even applying plugins? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, some I guess more like specific uh, plugins, like a compressing things that don't necessarily need to be compressed, but it's like a stylistic choice, or applying EQ to boost certain areas and reduce areas of other instruments in that same frequency range to make them gel together better, like, stuff like that.
It's super interesting. Yeah, I think I'm more of a like slap everything on and then I'll just be riding faders, even, sometimes point 0.1 decibel, and it
Hmm.
matters. It matters at that
Yeah, it
point.
does.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of that, and then just automating those plugins that I've kind of set. Then a lot of times after, like, a review, and by that I mean, like, I let it sit or whatever, and if I need to make something, brighter or whatever it may be. This is another cush tip that I this is just, like, probably no science behind this, but it was like, uh, don't ever go backwards. Now that we have the, processing power that we do with modern computers, like, put another one on and add on. Like, don't like if you made something too bright per se, um, like, put on another EQ to make it dull. Like, don't go
Hmm.
back to that, and I don't remember exactly what his rationale was behind that, but I was just like, "Yeah, it sounds good to me." Just like I like kinda committing to, just committing to certain things that are something small like that, like, okay, like, that's just a rule that I have now, and I find some of that to be helpful for me.
Yeah, it's for me. I always test when I add something in. I test it against how it sounds before. Like I'll silence it, then put it back on, and I'll sometimes you can't even hear a difference, and I'm like, "Oh, man," like, in my head, I'll add it, and I'm like, "Oh, that sounds so much better." Then I'll compare it to how it was before I added that plug in, and I'm like, "Oh, that I literally can't even tell."
Yeah,
So, then
yeah.
sometimes I'll just click X, get rid of it, 'cause I don't like to complicate things too much.
Totally, completely different approach, both super valid, and that's why this is art, you know?
Yep.
That's the fun part about it. But alright, I'm literally, like, fucking losing my train of thought mid-sentence, which tells me I need rest. But before sleep, we must have our final segment. Alright, Chris, so we've been talking a lot about playlists today. This final segment is, where you are going to share with us, our listeners, an EP, a song, an album, whatever you're feeling that has had you fired up lately, and I will include it on this show's playlist, Spotify playlist, which is called A Collective Musical Mind. So take a second, think it through, give us something that's had you super pumped up and inspired lately.
Hmm. Um, I think what should I go with? If I'm gonna go with an album, I think I'm gonna recommend Ends and Begins by Labyrinth. He's been one of my favorite artists lately. I think his production is awesome. The stuff he did on the Euphoria soundtrack is incredible. I think his new album's dope. I've been listening to it a lot. If I had to pick a single song, I think I'd probably go. Um,
No right or wrong answer.
I'm gonna go "Living in a Haze" by Milky Chance. That
Okay.
song's got me fired up a lot this year. Uh, Definitely a good song. So yeah, I'd say that those would be my picks, depending if you want a single or an album, and whatever would fit the playlist. So yeah.
You know what? I'll just go ahead and throw them both in there. Why not? So if you haven't already followed that playlist, A Collective Musical Mind, the Spotify playlist, give it a follow now and check out those tunes there. All right. Chris, Mr. Minnow, Thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. This has been A Musical Mind. Good night. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening all the way through to that one with Chris Minotti, better known as Minno. If you would like to connect with Minno, you can find him on Instagram. That's at It's Minno. And search him up on Spotify, Minno. Add one of his bangers to your next party playlist. So, hope you learned something today. I did, as always. It was great to hear more about that Spotify algorithm, those things that seem to control everything these days. Algorithm this, algorithm that. You can hate him or you can try and figure him out. So super grateful for him to share what he's learned along the way. That's it. That's a wrap. Until next time, guys. Thanks for listening to A Musical Mind. I have been your host, Richard Raymond II. If you, your band, or your friend, or anyone you know is in need of mixing and mastering services, I offer that remotely. Shoot me an email. That's richardraymond2@gmail.com. No spaces, all spelled out. You can also give me a follow, Richard_Raymond_II on Instagram. Shoot me a DM. We'll get to making some cool shit. And please like this podcast, share it with a friend, give it a 5-star rating. It ain't too hard to do. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll see you next time.